All right, July 2nd, 2024. I'm here with Mr. Frank Marshall, Alpha, the second of the 506, FSB Ripcord survivor and veteran. So, Frank, let's start with the basics. When and where were you born?
1949, February 2nd, 1949, in Philadelphia.
Now, what was your childhood like growing up in Philadelphia?
Like any others that hang on a corner, everything was street corner. I lived in a row home in Philadelphia. You played in the streets, half ball, bottle caps, and going. Then as I got older, teenager, going to dances at the church and just hanging out with a crowd, hanging on the corner.
Now, we've talked a little bit briefly, however, what did your parents do prior to, of course, your birth and even in this time?
My father was in the military at Pearl Harbor when they got bombed. They made a movie about him. It's a fictitious movie based on true characters called From Here to Eternity. My father was Friday, Salvatore Clark. My mother was a seamstress and she worked for the designers for Alfred Angelo and Picarin wedding gowns. And she would work in the uh, designer's room and she was the sewer.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, your father, how long did he stay in the Army?
Couple of years, I'm not sure exactly how many. He got out in Guadalcanal. He caught malaria.
And then came back to the States, and of course, and then what did he end up doing in Philadelphia?
He was a truck driver, and most of his life he got out and got in the Teamsters Union, and he played music at nights with his band.
Recorded a
And
few songs too, right?
they recorded quite a few songs and made an album called Hillbilly in Philly.
And we can find this on YouTube today, right?
Yeah, if you Google Four Alarm Boogie, Frank Marshall, you'll hear his record, and then you can see the rest of them that he's got up there.
Yes, sir. Now, as you're growing up in Philly, you get a little older. I mean, as you're coming to your teenage years, are you playing sports? Are you in school? What's going on through that point?
No, I went to high school. I wasn't a good kid in school. I went to a Votech, took up. Um, I graduated as a plumber. I took plumbing. I took printing and bakery and a few different things. I wasn't a real good scholar in school, and I graduated though. And then I got a job as a plumber for about a year and left that and went back into printing. And then I was doing real good with printing. And as I went along, I was working as a printer, in a print shop and just waiting to get drafted.
Now, as we speak of getting drafted in itself, when did you first start hearing about Vietnam and what was happening?
I paid no attention to it. It was in high school, the teacher would tease us that, if we didn't, I graduated in 1966 and Vietnam was still young. And people would tease, if you're going to get drafted, whatever else. I paid no attention to it. I didn't care. It just didn't faze me. I figured when my time came, I'd go.
Now, what were you doing while waiting on that in itself?
I was running a one man print shop basically. I was doing pretty good. I worked hard and had a nice job. And then on between Christmas and New Year's of 1968, I got my draft notice, and I had a report January 14th, 1969.
It's funny you say that because January 14th is my birthday, actually.
Happy birthday!
Now, when you get this notice in itself, and I assume it was for the Army, were you just going to go into the Army, or did you have plans of possibly enlisting into another branch?
No, I didn't. I didn't care. I was going in the army. I just figured I'd take my chances, and I figured as my luck was going, I wouldn't have no problem. The war would be over, and I'd just go through basic and training and get out of the army and go back to work.
Now, obviously, that's not how that worked out, now was it?
No.
So we get the notice. When do you step off for basic training?
January 14th, I reported to 401 Broad Street. They put me on a train, took me to North Carolina. I went to Fort Bragg for basic, and then they sent me after that to Fort Dix for AIT. After that, they sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia for NCOC training.
Now, prior to going off the basic, your dad being a survivor of Pearl Harbor, being at Guadalcanal, did he say much about his service in World War II or give you any advice?
No. My dad was pretty quiet about it all, except for the fact that, his friends that they were in the movie with, they would always get together, and he would just, he was worried. He didn't want me, I couldn't avoid the draft. He didn't want me to avoid the draft, but, you know, he was worried that I was gone.
Now, as you know, you come down to North Carolina. It's January, Fort Bragg. It's cold as hell, I assume.
Yeah.
What's your introduction to basic training like?
It wasn't bad. I just, we would do all the training, everything else, and I just went through with everything. And you know, everything you have to do doing basic.
You have to do, I assume, a lot of running, a lot of calisthenics.
Running, everything you had to do. I mean, they just training you.
Now, were any of your drill instructors, drill sergeants, were they combat veterans of Vietnam?
Yes, a lot of them were coming back from Vietnam, and they had a few months left to do, and they would become drill sergeants or instructors.
Now, in basic, did any of your instructors talk openly about Vietnam or what you might expect if you were going to be deployed as an 11 Bravo?
Well, they just, that kind of like the way they were, where I was there, you're gone, and they were kind of hard. They were not easy on you. They were kind of hard. They were always pushing, 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 and telling you nasty stuff. I guess that's part of the Army training at that time.
Now, did you feel prepared by the time that you went to Vietnam with your basic, your AIT, and your NCOIC training?
No, I didn't feel I was capable, of anything. I just went. And again, after I got home, when I got my orders for Vietnam, um, my father did not want a party or anything before I left. He says, when we come home, you'll have a party. But before you go, you're not doing anything and you're gone. And I just figured I'd go. And um, everybody was telling me, um, as long as you don't get with the 101st and you don't go up north, you're going to be fine, because that's where all the fighting is at this time. That was in October of 1969. And I figured I'd be okay. My luck, I'm not going to go there.
Now, prior to your arrival in country, had you heard about the 101st in Vietnam or anything relating to Hamburger Hill at that time?
I was in basic when they had Hamburger Hill, and it was pretty bad. And everything I heard about Vietnam, again, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to everything. I just was one of them that just floated by. I just kept going, and that would be it.
All right. Now, speaking of some of the aspects of the 101st and eventually you getting into combat, in basic training, what weapon did you train on the firing range?
The M16.
Now, at that time, your first introduction to the M16, what is your opinion of that weapon, of course, when you see it in basic?
It was fine. It shot. I hit the targets, and I didn't care.
Now, how long did basic training last for you, Frank?
From October to August.
And then from AIT, you're learning advanced infantry tactics, I assume with the squad and the platoon level and eventually company exercises?
Yeah, everything I went through, like the basic and then the AIT and then the NCOC, is where you come out a sergeant. And I didn't want to come out a sergeant because I didn't want to lead troops. So I didn't take my stripes on that one, doing ranger training at the last week or whatever else. And I just failed everything and just told them I didn't want to go. And as a sergeant, I didn't want the stripes. And so I failed that course.
Now, with that being said, of course, what rank were you when you arrived in Vietnam?
Spec 4.
Spec 4. So with advanced infantry training and even your NCOC training, did you train on the M79 or any other weapons?
I've shot them. I shot all the weapons during training. Didn't actually train on them. You shot them,
Right.
you used them.
Now, outside of the M16 in that period, were there any weapons that stood out to you that were just a hell of a lot of fun to shoot?
Not really.
Not really. So, as we roll on to your time going to Vietnam, when did you get your orders that you were going to be sent to Vietnam?
When I left Georgia, I was supposed to report to Vietnam September 29th, I think it was. I got done in Georgia in late August, and they gave me like almost a month. And I was supposed to report to Vietnam. And it was the same day my cousin, who I was very good friends with, was getting married. So I said, I'm going to Vietnam. What are they going to do? And I went to his wedding, and I reported late to Fort Dix to go to Vietnam. So I got to Fort Dix, and the guy was like, okay, you're a couple days late. He said, I'm going to write you up an Article 14 or Article 15, whatever it was. He said, when you get to your next station, he said, just hand this to your officer. And he chuckled, right? So I said, okay. So I got that, like, nah, I don't have to hand it to him. So I didn't. So I just reported.
So, what'd you do with that paper?
I think I still got it at home.
So, you report to your next station, and then that next station just happened to be where?
Well, I got to Vietnam, and we flew in to Long Bend down south. And that's where you first go in. And they keep you there and sign you to a unit. And as everybody says, as long as you don't get with the 101st, you'll be fine. Well, my unit was called. I was sent up north with the 101st.
Now, prior to getting that order to go to the 101st, you step off the plane there in Long Binh. What's your first impression of Vietnam?
It was hot, and that's when I started. I guess I seen everybody else getting on the plane to go home, and a lot were bandaged. And as they're passing you or sitting there with you, and they're going home, and you're coming, you know. Some said good luck, you know. Some said I'm going home, but natural, and that was it.
So, at the time, the 101st, where were they located at headquarters wise in the part of in northern South Vietnam?
They were up in Phu Bai, and that's where I went. They sent me to Camp Evans up there in I-Corps and Phu Bai, and when I got there, they assigned me, my company, and I went through like a week or two of P training. They call it just another refresher course, and then were sending me out to my company. My company was out in the field at the time, so a couple of us new guys were training. And when we got done our training, they gave us a case of C rations, poncho liner, jacket, ammunition, hand grenades, smoke grenades. I mean, I must have had about 128 pounds in my rucksack, and I couldn't even stand up. And I got on the helicopter, and it took me out to my guys in the field.
Shit.
Now, this is my first time going to the field, and as I'm flying from Flatlands and Camp Evans up past all the mountains, and my helicopter's landing at the LZ, and around the perimeter of the LZ is all these guys with long hair, beards, mud. I mean, they just looked scraggly, and I did not want to get off at that time. I said, "This no." That's the first time I felt scared, and I did not want to get off that helicopter. And they came by, and then that's when I was a new guy, so they were just pulling me off the helicopter there and telling me to go to the perimeter and sit there and watch. And they took me, and it was like a 4-foot ravine, little creek, and The guy that grabbed me said, you know, look straight. If you see anything, shoot, because there's no friendlies out there. So you see anything, you shoot. I started to, oh God, this ain't gonna work out well. And I sat there and I had the M16 and a rucksack that I couldn't even lift. And the next helicopter was coming in after they left. After my helicopter took off, another helicopter comes in with six more guys, three new guys. One guy that was coming in, he was going home, but he wanted to come back out and say goodbye to everybody. And so there were six guys on that helicopter coming out to us. And the helicopter, when it was landing, somehow the skid got caught in the brush and it started to tilt. And all six guys fell out of the helicopter as it was tilting. They either jumped or they fell out. And the helicopter blades cut every one of them up into pieces. And body parts were flying all over. Something hit me in the back because I was looking out straight. And something hit me in the back and threw me into the ditch or the creek. And at that time, when I got up, there was somebody's head beside me and a 2-quart canteen. Now, one of them hit me in the back and threw me into the river, the creek, but I don't know which one it was. But we had to go around pick up all the body parts. That was my first 5 minutes in the field.
Jesus Christ.
I wanted to go home. I wanted to get out of there. I did not like the feeling I had, and from that moment on, it was just a feeling I just did not like being there.
Now, and with any of the questions I ask, of course, you don't have to answer them. However, seeing something that traumatic, did it impact you then, or was it later that you see the gore, the gruesomeness of it?
Well, I don't think you can get much gorier than that. I didn't think at the time, and I just thought this is a horrible accident, and I just didn't feel good, but they had us pick up body parts and move out right away, and everything from that pace was fast. And my rucksack was so heavy I couldn't walk up the hill. It was almost straight up, and it was muddy. And that's when I was slagging off from the beginning down to the back of the uh, back of the platoon there, and where I was at, and one of the sergeants grabbed me and started screaming about all the stuff I had in my rucksack that was worthless, and took it all out and made other people carry some of it and split it up until we got back up and set up for an NDP. Because now it's dark, we had to pick up the body pieces, but we had to get out of there, and it was dark until we set up. So we set up and we walked up, and we finally got to an NDP, and that was my first day.
So with that first day, you settled down in that night defensive position, and you still got the body parts with you as well. How long did you guys?
No, they sent the body parts
out. Okay, because I know that in some cases, birds couldn't maybe get in itself, but even then, that's a hell of a first entry into country, and no shots were fired yet.
No, no shots. It wasn't an enemy that shot down the helicopter. It was an accident.
Now, stories like that don't get a lot of attention. The accidents that happen, the unfortunate circumstances. But you see that within your first 5 minutes, and that's got to be that wake up, oh shit moment. This is it.
Yeah, it I did not have a good feeling after that.
Now, that first night rolls in. You're out in the bush, and you've got your times. Of course, you're taking guard duty. What's it like that first night?
Well, for some reason, being a new guy and the confusion with everything, I didn't have to pull guard or anything that night. When we went to sleep, nobody gave me a guard or a position. I'm not sure why or whatever else. It was just everybody was confused at that time. And we had a couple new guys with us. Now we got up the next day and walked to another hilltop, and we were walking. And at that point, it was like then they gave me a squad to go to. I went to the squad, then I'd start pulling guard duty at night, and we get up and walk again. And then they asked me it was my turn to walk point. Now, you should never let a new guy walk point, never. But at that point, they felt it was okay that I'd walk point. I had the M16. Well, I couldn't walk point. I was scared. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing, and they're telling me to go this way and that way. I have no sense of direction. I'm shaking and everything else walking point, and um, so they didn't like the way I walk point. And one of the guys that got killed in the first 5 minutes carried the M79, so they needed a new M79er, so they gave me the M79. So I was fortunate at that point because I didn't have to walk point. I felt relieved a little bit better. And it wasn't a few more days, and we're walking around, and there was a sniper shooting at us, and shooting at the point man or whatever, and everybody gets down, and I could hear the bullets passing through my ears. I mean, the bullets were close. I can hear it was very thick vegetation, and they yelled from the front of the line, "Send the 79 up." So as it comes down, I can hear it, a couple times repeated. Send the 79 up, send the 79 up, send the 79 up. I said, okay, and I grabbed the 79 and I went here because it was my first time having bullets fired at me, and I was scared as shit, and I tried to pass them up the 79. Well, they didn't like that. So everybody starts screaming, like, what, are you joking? Bah, bah, bah. And they turn around, and I said, all right. So I went up with this M79, and they had me fire a few rounds out. And then the firing stopped, and we continued walking on. We didn't have anybody hurt that day. So it was pretty good.
Now, being the M79 man in itself, it's a weapon that can be used to clear out a bunker in front of you, or you can even angle it up almost like a mortar for kind of like a indirect fire support. However, with the thick vegetation, did you have any limitations using the M79 in thick jungle like that?
Yes. Uh, it has to go 25 meters before it'll go off. So if you hit something, it's not going to go off. Now, it was pretty clear. I had pretty good shots at what I was going to shoot for. My squad that I had at that time and my leaders were pretty good, and it was like usually we'd be walking up the side of a mountain or a ridge or whatever else. And if we got hit, it was from another ridge, so I can shoot right over there. Most of the time, we've had Cobras and gunships firing all around us because it wasn't much activity then. It wasn't much combat at that time with these guys. Didn't see a whole lot of combat.
Now, speaking of some of your leaders, and then we'll get into some of the combat aspects. I know that you were in Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 506. What platoon and squad were you in within Alpha Company?
When I first got there, I was in 1st Platoon and 1st Squad. That's where they put me, and that's where I stayed until through December. Let's see, I got there helicopter crash was the end of October, so I got to my field then. And then November, December, and beginning of January, we might have been on a fire base. I think we were on Bastogne for a little bit, which was nice. And then we went on Firebase Jack for a while.
Now, with that, and talking about some of the different leaders that you work with, who was the 1st platoon commander at that time?
I had a couple different ones at the time. I can't think of the names right now. The one I had, he had a booby trap. His foot, he hurt his foot or whatever else, and he was taken out, and we got replaced. And I had about 2 different lieutenants at that time until I had, after Jack, they gave us Lieutenant Dudley Davis, and he was new, and he was with us a short time when we first went into March 12th into to open up Ripcord. He was killed.
Now, in leading up to Ripcord, of course, was Captain Hawkins in command of the company when you arrived?
No, he was with Charlie Company. He came later after us. After I did, he didn't come in country until I think maybe January, February, somewhere in there, and he was with Charlie Company for a while. Then I had Burkhardt. Captain Burkhardt was my captain when we went into Ripcord. And on March 12th I was in a couple firefights before March 12th. Nothing major. I think we lost a couple guys in between. And then March 12th, when we landed, uh, we pulled, the whole company was going into abandoned. Well, that day was like crazy. We were supposed to go into on another hill. I think it was 902. Originally, that was going to be the Firebase Ripcord because it was the highest hill. As we were in the air, they couldn't get on. They couldn't land on 902 because fog, rain, or enemy was up on 902. They had bombed it. They napalmed it. They had did everything to that hill, and we were prepped. It was prepped for us to land on it, but they changed hills while we were in midair, and we had to go over to the other hill, which is now Ripcord, which was not prepped. So when we landed, we got hit, and it turned into a hot LZ.
Now, was that your first experience with the hot LZ?
Yes, that was my first hot LZ.
Now, how big was the LZ on March the 12th? How many birds could fit into that one?
Oh, it's a pretty big hilltop. Uh, I don't know the size of it, but it was pretty big, and because birds could come in, the helicopters could come in a couple different sections on it.
Now, as your bird landed, were rounds firing then, or did you get off and then the firefight began?
Now the first few helicopters in was green smoke was out, so that meant it's friendly. So when we were landing, we saw the green smoke, but when my helicopter was getting closer, all of a sudden red smoke went out. So as my helicopter was landing, we were getting hit with mortars and RPGs.
Now, inside the helicopter, as you're coming in itself, you can see the red smoke. What's going through your mind knowing that this is going to be hot?
Uh, it's a scary situation. It's like, fear. Now you got to get off the helicopter, and it's bare ground, and you got to run for cover. So I was in the middle seat at the time, middle of the helicopter, no seats, but middle on the floor. The two guys on the one door on my end that went out, and then me after them, and the other three go out the other side. So when them two ran out and they were on the ground, there was a impact back, and there was a split in between two big rocks. So they ran over there, and as I was getting off and I'm coming out, they were yelling to me to come over to them, Westerfeld and McCoy. And as I started to get up, run over there, they got hit with a RPG. They both got wounded, and now the next helicopter's coming down in under fire, and my sergeant and a couple other guys and me, they said to grab the wounded, and I dropped my rucksack. So as I dropped my rucksack, um, my vest came off with it, and I went over and picked up Westerfeld and helped throw him on the helicopter. And the helicopter left, and they pulled out. And then my sergeant grabbed me at that time by back of the collar and just, come on, we're going down the hill. And I had my weapon on my shoulder, my M79, but I didn't have my rucksack or my vest with the 79s. And we went down And at that point, um, the squad got into position and they saw the NBA. They had the machine gun over there, and they told me to shoot and get him, fire on him. And when I went to crack my M79, I found out I didn't have any rounds with me. They were all up on top of the hill. You could have heard the names I was called at that time.
Well, we can talk about some of those if you want to, Frank.
And then they said that, so they made me run up the hill to get my grenades. As I'm running up the hill, the machine gun is firing at me. And I went up, I got my grenades, and I came back down the hill. Well, as I'm getting ready to mark the target, the Cobras were already there shooting them up. So that was fine. He was marked and they got the machine gunner and it stopped firing. But the guys turned around to me and said they never saw anybody maneuver. They said my training paid off because the way I was maneuvering up the hill as the machine gunner was shooting at me, I didn't get hit. They said they thought I would be dead. And I explained to them that it was not quick maneuvering. I was slipping. I was so scared. My feet were not working under me, and they were just slipping and falling and going each way they could go. So then we ended up spending the night there, and from March 12th on, it was nothing but hell.
Now, from that point forward, I mean, Ripcord turns into a massive engagement against the 324 NVA and some other units operating in the area. However, for the longest time, nobody knew about it.
Well, as they were trying to open up the hill, we failed on March 12th. Bravo Company went on April 1st and failed, had a massacre. Charlie Company went in on April 15th and finally opened up the hill. They didn't have any resistance on April 15th, which we can't understand why. After April 15th, they started building. And that's when Charlie Company started putting everything onto the base. And after that, whoever was on the fire base at the time, pulling guard and everything else, the line companies, the artillery would set up. All the other companies would be out surrounding the fire base. And most of them were always in contact. Something was always happening. For a while there through May, it was pretty quiet. June got a little bit heavier. In fact, it got pretty heavy in June, and then July 1st, it got very heavy. Now, with all the fighting that was going on, they didn't want the media out there. They didn't want any publicity because of Hamburger Hill. They figured they'd keep it quiet, and they discouraged the media from going out there to talk to them.
And that's one of the reasons, now people are knowing about Ripcord, but for the longest time, it was just those of you that were there. And even then, you guys were told that you were full of shit.
Well, that's exactly what happened. After we came home, you'd have nobody believed you because nobody ever heard of Ripcord. Nobody ever heard of the story. Nobody ever heard of the fire base. And they were Vietnam veterans. And they said they don't know nothing about it. You mentioned Hamburger Hill, which was our unit. Everybody heard about it because the press and everybody else got wind of it.
Well, and even speaking of, the fire base in itself and the terrain that we're talking about, what was the terrain around Ripcord like? What are we operating in? I mean, it's definitely not the flat lowlands.
No, it was all mountains. Mountains and valleys and up and down, and you can't walk on it. We went to a dedication one time years ago, and for Bob Kelso in Fort Campbell, and there were a bunch of guys in there, 3 guys in there, that said they were friends with Bob Kelso. That we asked them what unit they were in. They said transportation. How'd you know Bob? Well, we used to drive the trucks up to Ripcord and give them the artillery. Well, we all looked at them. You can't drive a truck up there. You couldn't drive a truck anywhere near there. You can't even get tanks up there. You couldn't get, there's no transportation except for helicopters to get in there.
Well, and even thinking about the hill too, you've got Artie up there, 105s or 155s.
You had the 155, the 105s. You had them all up there.
Could the artillery guns even angle their barrels to give you guys support in the valley surrounding the hill, or did you have to rely on 60 and 81 millimeter mortars and the Cobras?
No, they were all pretty good. The artillery had to point down instead of the normal way that artillery shoot up. The artillery guns would be pointing down.
Direct fire.
Direct fire. You could see in a lot of pictures that are out there that people had took how the guns are facing,
Jesus.
aiming.
Now, with the battalion operating at Ripcord, so you'd have one company on guard duty on the line, and then three of you just rotating around patrolling. Now, were you finding any booby traps out there or anything of that nature? Any signs of NVA activity?
Not much in booby traps because the NVA was so populated in that area. They wouldn't put booby traps because they used the same areas and trails and everything else that we used. It was pretty common that they were right around us all the time. They had a lot of tunnels underneath of us, a lot of positions and little knolls or hilltops that we would go to, they would be right under. Now you had three line companies, Alpha, Bravo. Bravo was up on the hill during July. You had Alpha, Charlie, and Delta that were working around the fire base of the 2nd of 506. Then you had the 501st and the 502nd. They called them in July to work with us because we needed more men out there. They said there's records that there's over 10,000 MBA around us. We wiretapped an MBA wire line and found out we were in between. Alpha Company was in between two base camps of MBA. We were right in the middle of them, and we ran into the wire line.
Now, with that being said, with the numbers of NVA, how many troopers of the 506, the 501st, and the 502nd are we talking about being involved in this compared to 10,000?
It's hard to count. Nobody has an actual count. There's no actual records of how many people or whatever else. But in each company, you had maybe 100 guys. Just figure on an average, anywhere between 70 to 100 sometimes. You had the other brigades that came in. So, I mean, some say there was 600 Americans out there. But I would say at least 600 of us, but there was no more than 1,000.
So, knowing the odds, knowing the amount of NVA that were out there, did that change the morale for any of the men in Alpha Company?
Oh, yeah. We all knew, like we were losing guys. We were killing them left and right. Every day you'd see an NVA and shoot them. Just walking by you like you weren't even there. And it's like they got to know we're here. And a lot of us were getting very, very discouraged with the whole thing.
Now, and speaking of the casualties, was Division even sending replacements or ammunition or anything up to Ripcord at this point?
No, they didn't have the replacements to send us. If we lose guys, they would try to get new guys, but it's what the government would send them up, just however they got their new guys. The ammunition, the government at that time, Senate, whoever else was in charge, said that they could not send us any more ammo for the fire base, the artillery. They cut all their artillery down. So we were getting low on ammunition because we were firing artillery every day. I mean, they were using the artillery guys are like the best. They worked their ass off up there. They were getting mortared every day in July, and under fire, they were still firing for us. They cared about us. They worked for us. Same thing with the helicopter pilots. The helicopter pilots came in no matter what. I mean, they were the bravest guys I ever knew.
So, even speaking of the support that we're working with here, even then though, you've got the birds coming in, you've got already guys busting their asses. However, you're outnumbered 10,000 to 600, let's say. Eventually, those numbers start to whittle after you get in consistent firefights day after day after day.
We were down to very low. July 22nd, Alpha Company was down to 76 guys when we got hit.
And then when you guys got hit, 6 walked away.
There was only 6 out of 76 that didn't get wounded or killed.
Thinking about fights like that happening, because I know Charlie gets hit as well. They get overrun in the night and have to deal with that. You've got fights like this all over and around Ripcord. When did people start to realize that we've either got to pull out or we've either got to move another division in here to assist?
Lucas wanted us to continue fighting.
Who is Lucas for the sake of the interview?
Lieutenant Colonel Lucas. He was the guy that was in command out there. And then you had Harrison came in, Ben Harrison. He was colonel at the time. Then he was taking over with Lucas on this, and a couple of all the commanders that were down there would decide, and some wanted to continue to fight. General Burry, they all wanted to continue, fighting until Ben Harrison finally said, "This is enough. We're pulling out." And they decided to withdraw everybody on the 23rd. It just so happened that on morning of July 22nd, they had Delta Company pulled out. They had Charlie Company pulled out of the fields in the area. Alpha Company was left alone. And they were going to pull Alpha Company out when Alpha Company got hit. And we got hit really bad that day and had to stay that night. And Delta Company came in the next morning to rescue us. And as Delta Company was rescuing us, the helicopters they were using to rescue us, they had helicopters at the same time withdrawing everything that was on Firebase Ripcord. So it was probably one of the largest, most successful evacuations of the Vietnam War. Nobody will know that because they won't tell you that. But the helicopter pilots that came in, not one, every one of the helicopters was all shot up. Every one of them. There wasn't one that didn't have any bullets or anything else in it. They were all shot up, some not able to fly again. And these helicopter pilots were flying these back and forth to get us out.
Now, how many birds were shot down that day?
I don't even know. I don't think we lost any helicopters that day. I know over the time we've had helicopters shot down during the March 12th to 23rd assault. But that day, it was just unbelievable how they were coming in, and the NBA, and then you had the fighter jets dropping bombs all around. They were dropping napalm. They were dropping bombs. They were doing everything they could do all around us. They got us out finally first in the morning and got us all back to the the rear. Now, I was wounded on July 22nd 3 times. One time in the face, the satchel charge blew up my face. Another time I was continuing trying to run up the hill. My arm got hit. And then I got shrapnel on my ankle bone and I went down. And by that time, I just thought that was it. I thought I was going to die. I mean, there was just NBA running around the top of the hill, our guys running around, shooting everybody. And like I said, Tom or Tommy Webster was one of the bravest guys I ever know. He was getting everybody together and running up the hill, trying to take the hill back. And in the meantime, I'm laying on the ground. The third time I was hit, I didn't know if I was going to give up or what I was going to do. I had the M79. I couldn't fire close. And somebody threw me a M16 that I could use if I saw anything at that point. But at that point, uh, one of the guys uh, from our company, Shelton, came by and he saw, he picked me up and carried me up and put me behind a tree and said that they're dropping the bombs on us. They're going to be danger close. And I looked at him and I had no idea what he was talking about until seconds later I heard the bomb, a 250-pound bomb dropped right on top of us. Lifted me and him at least 4 foot off the ground, a couple foot off the ground. We were thrown up from the vibration. One guy got a concussion from the bomb that dropped. And that scared the NBA away. And they just ran away. And from there, the rest of the night we waited until Delta Company came in the next morning.
Now, leading up and kind of backtracking here a bit, on the 22nd, the ambush that happens, of course, where the NVA hit Alpha. How did that start?
Well, we were on the 21st. We tapped the wire line that said we were in between two base camps of NVA soldiers. At that point, we knew we were in deep shit. So they ended up deciding they were going to close the fire base, evacuate it. They evacuated the companies around us, Charlie Company and Delta Company. That left Alpha Company alone down there till we got evacuated. They told us to walk to an LZ, and we started out in that direction. They called back and said, go to the LZ behind us that we were walking to. Now, we just came from that area. The NBA were following us. We knew that they were going to, know where we were at. We know they're following us. We got to get the hell out of there. We all start fighting because we wanted to go forward to the other LZ, not backwards. It ended up we had to go backwards because Lucas says you got to go back. So we went back. Second platoon start walking down as first platoon was walking back up. Second platoon walked right into them. As they were walking into them, we heard a pop, pop, pop. And that was when they dropped mortars. And everybody scattered off the top of the knoll we were on. And the mortars started landing, hitting a bunch of our guys. The NBA were up on top of the hill before the last mortar stopped. At that point, we were trying to regroup, and we were all scattered all around. And out of 76 of us, well, you had Lee's platoon with about 20-some guys down there. He got surrounded by the NBA, and he had to fight his way out of there. We had to fight our way up on the top of the hill. At that point, that's when the biggest cluster ever, and the shit hit the fan, and we lost, out of 76 guys that were fighting, we had, then they called in the Phantom jet to drop the bomb. And he dropped a 250-pound bomb right on top of us. At that time, that's when the NBA decided they're going to run off, and they wanted to go to the fire base to help the rest of them because they said there was over 10,000 NBA in the area. There was about 400 at the base of where we were at. And how many came up on us? It could be 100, it could have been 200. We'll never know because they surrounded us. How many were up on top? is hard to say. How many we killed is hard to say. We had uh, cobras and bombs and everything else, and everybody shooting and fighting. It's kind of hard to say exactly what went down, and nobody has any record of anything. Hell on a Hilltop, Ben Harrison's book, probably tells the book best description of what the NBA had going on. And then after that, Delta Company came in the next morning, and they had to land on the hilltop on the LZ that we were going to go to in the first place. And then they walked over to us, and they had to cut an LZ because it was all trees, the hill we were on. They couldn't move us because everybody was wounded. So they blew up all the trees that were around on the LZ. The helicopters had to come straight down. They couldn't, they had to slowly come straight down because when they cut the trees, they only cut enough that the blades could come straight down. So the helicopters would come straight down, and we would throw the wounded, or, well, they threw the wounded on, and I was one of the wounded they threw on the helicopter. And I had to ride in on top of 3 dead bodies. And then the helicopter took off very slow until it got to the top of the trees and then would take off. That was the scariest, probably the scariest of my life ever. That one time, just going up, just waiting until they got to the top of the tree because if the NBA wanted to, they could just take one shot and knock it out and we'd all be dead.
Well, that, and I guess too, go back to your first 5 minutes in country, where all it takes is a skid to get hung on a piece of limb or a tree, and you've seen how that goes down.
My first day to my last day. I mean, and people wondered why I wasn't in a sound mind for years after I got home from Vietnam. Because after I got hit, they took us into the Camp Evans, and the helicopters were just landing with all the wounded from us and the fire base. And the people in the rear that were taking everybody off was just couldn't believe what was going on. They took me off and they sent me to the 85th Evacuation Hospital in Da Nang. And they cut me open and dug out, whatever they had to do, and then they did the surgery and sent me right down to another Army hospital. Well, one hospital, the first was in Phu, and then the second was in Da Nang until they finished it. And all these guys, they just kept getting wounded because we were getting so many wounded that day. So then they sent me to that's in Da Nang is when my sergeant, squad leader, and my captain, and one of the majors that ran the operation came to the hospital and gave me my Purple Heart and my Bronze Star with the V um, at the hospital. So that was like, okay. And then I went to the Air Force Hospital down in Cameron Bay. They sent me down there. So total, I was out 6 weeks. And I stayed in the Air Force Hospital as long as I could. I loved it. It was like back in the world. My mattress was about 6 inches thick. The food was fantastic, and I didn't want to leave, so I just played I couldn't walk. I mean, they call it skating, but uh, I did my time there, and then I had 2 weeks left to come back. So when I got back to the rear, well, what happened was my mother got notified that I was wounded, and they sent her a telegram. Your son has been wounded in Vietnam and he's ambulatory. She got nervous as hell. She didn't understand exactly, like for the first second ambulatory, she thought I was amputated. So she called her friend, Joshua Alberg, who was a senator in Pennsylvania, and he said he'd get back to her, and he called Vietnam, Department of Army and everybody else he knew. They told her that was the third time I was wounded, and I'm going back to the field after I get out of the hospital. So he sent somebody over there to tell my captain that they're full of shit because I'm not going back to the field. I got 2 weeks left. I'm going home. So they got mad that I had somebody from the States get in touch with them. So they put me on shit burning detail for 2 weeks. So, and then I came home. But that's the story of my Vietnam.
Well, and if I may ask while we're here, Frank, and I know that we'll do this again either on Zoom or at the reunion, but you got a Bronze Star with Combat Valor device. If I may ask, what'd you get the Bronze Star for?
I got one Bronze Star for being there, and the Bronze Star with the V for being in that battle that day. Everybody got some kind of medal. I didn't do anything heroic. I never did anything to be a hero.
Well, and even thinking about this too, of the guys that were killed in the fight from Alpha Company. I know we mentioned this in talking, but some of them were alive, wounded when the NVA walked up on them and were executing the wounded.
That's what some of them saw them do, shoot them right in the head. That's what they do.
And then for those of you that were wounded or not wounded from Alpha Company, I guess that's where a lot of you realize you're in the fight for your lives. Like it is, truth be told, this is either you make it out or Alpha's getting wiped.
I thought we were dead. I didn't think we had a chance. I, if they would have came back that night, we would have been dead. There was no way that I thought I was going to live that through the night. I've always been like, what happens, happens, and like I'll be home soon. But that was the scariest time. It was just, I just seeing all the NBA and seeing everything else that was going on that day. I just didn't think we were going to get out.
Well, and I know you've been in touch with several members of Alpha. Have any of you guys figured out why the NVA didn't try to push back that night and wipe you guys out?
Nobody will know that story. Nobody can understand. They had us. They had us, and then they just, after that last bomb drop, they just walked away. I mean, tell me, I don't know. Nobody knows. They could have just walked right up that hill and got us. With all the people they had, all the men they had around us, they could have brought them all up. The gunships and the bomb, they were killing a lot of them. I mean, they were hitting them, but they could have took us. When the night fell and it's dark, um, I didn't sleep at all that night. It was just the scariest night because they could have just came right up. We had nobody to fight, nobody to last, so we don't know.
Well, and speaking of the fighting, of course, and even that night, you've got your wounded with you yourself. You've got the dead too. Of those dead, the 14, how many of them did you know well?
Um, it's hard to say. I know them all basically, but when you're in Vietnam, you know the guy beside you and the guy in your squad, unless you're a lieutenant or an officer or a squad leader. I was a grunt, so basically every day I spent with my squad, and there was about 5 or 6 of us that was always together. At night, when we pulled our guard at night, you set up on the NDP and you got 3 guys with you. Um, that's you over there. That's who you spend 24/7 with. So you don't actually know. And then the rest of them, I never know. Hi, how you doing? Or whatever else, or you need this, you need that. But very rarely did you know everybody.
Well, and speaking of the knowing and the casualties and the officers too, on that fight for the 22nd and the 23rd, what happened to the command structure with the CO, platoon leaders? Were any of the officers unwounded?
No, I think all the I lost my lieutenant. He was killed right away, and he was a new guy. He just got there. Um, let's see, Captain Hawkins. He was shot through the neck, and with a piece that went right through. Luckily, it didn't hit anything. He continued, talking and everything else. A couple of sergeants, one of the platoon sergeant, he was killed along with the platoon leader. Um, we had no command left. Uh, Tommy Webster was the highest commander.
What was his rank at that time?
I think he was sergeant at that point, and he took over basically, leading everybody up the hill.
Now, in his leading up the hill, of course, and with the NVA being so close, did hand-to-hand combat happen that day?
I don't know of any hand to hand. I never heard of it. I heard one story uh, where the guy was very close to him, but as he shot him. But I don't know anybody else.
Well, and even thinking of it now, some 60 years later, you guys from Ripcord, the survivors, you have formed a tight knit organization in itself. You're close together because, one, people didn't respect you after the war, especially saying that Ripcord didn't happen. But you guys gather for reunions and you formed a tight knit community. And you are one of the founders of that, one of the founding fathers.
Yes, there was four of us. There was Chip Collins started it, and there was about a group of about 12 guys that were in contact in 1985. And then four of us sat together, had a meeting. Chuck Hawkins, Chip Collins, John Mahalko, and myself to plan the first reunion for 1986. And at that reunion, we had 12 guys. 12 of us got together for the reunion. That was the first Ripcord Association reunion. And as the years went by, we got more contacts and more people came, including the generals, the leaders of the battle, um, the officers, everybody that was involved. And by 2000, we had a major group. That's when Keith Nolan's book came out. And now we're losing guys every month. Somebody dies, but we're up to about almost 700 active members right now that are active in it. We have about at least 70 come to the reunions with their wives. This year, there's at least 70 or 80 Ripcord veterans that'll be there with their wives. And over the year, I'm just redoing the roster right now, but we were up to like 1,500 members at one time. And that's quite a few associate members, too. So it's very interesting what we have done. And the best thing about the association that I enjoy is it's helped me tremendously talking to these guys. But usually somebody new comes to the reunion. They won't come. They get to the reception, they want to go home. They don't want to come in. And if somebody can get out there and grab them before they leave and they come in, they'll never miss another reunion. And most of the guys that come to the reunion will never miss another reunion. And that's how it's been for years.
Would you say that the reunion is therapy and healing for guys who have never been before?
Without a doubt. And they'll all tell me all the time how they appreciate that, what we have done, what the association has done for them. I mean, they'll tell you over and over again. Freddie Gilbert, fantastic. What it's done for him and his family, and how his family respects him now. Like, in other words, most of the people, problem with Vietnam veterans is you come home. I was never married. I was always single all my life until recently. But most of them have children, a wife and children that they're angry with. And it's not against them, but they're just angry. And they have this angriness inside of them. And their kids and their wife don't respect them because they don't know what they did. The association, anybody that has brought the wife and their kids to the reunion with them, go home a whole different idea with their father or husband has done, and it has helped them with their marriage, their family, and that's what I appreciate the best out of the association. Not that I appreciate we're getting together and I'm seeing them again, or what they've done for me, but what it has done for their families to respect them. That is, you can't ask for better.
That's outstanding, Frank. One last question, and then
Yes.
we'll win this one for our viewers who are going to see this, because somebody's going to watch this. If they wanted to know more about Ripcord, are there any books that you would recommend that they would look into?
Yes. First, I would go on to the website, www.ripcordassociation.com. In there, there's a lot of links that go, like if you click on the videos, you can watch videos from National Geographic, War Stories with Oliver North. All the documentaries are on there. Uh, if you want to read some good books, Keith Nolan was the first book with Siege of Firebase Ripcord by Keith Nolan. You have Chris Brady's interview book, um, remembering rem, remembering Firebase Ripcord. Yes, that's outstanding. Of the interviews of the guys that were there, you have another book. Operation Texas Star by Roberts, I think it is. And then you have Hell on a Hilltop by General Ben Harrison, which explains he went to Vietnam and talked to the general that fought us. And even I couldn't believe some of the stuff that was in there. We would stop at a hill to sleep for an NDP, and the NBA were right underneath of us in their bunkers, in the tunnel. I couldn't believe half this stuff. So it's very interesting. And if you do watch this, or the only thing I can say is pass it along to everybody about Firebase Ripcord, because nobody's ever heard of it. It's one of the top 10 worst battles ever in Vietnam, and nobody's ever heard of it. And those, yeah, they're books or documentaries, but it's not known. And we would love to have it known before we all pass. So, thank you.
Outstanding. Frank, I always do this, and I always tell my students this whenever I cover Vietnam in my classroom, is that if you ever see a Vietnam veteran, you don't have to know them, but tell them, thank you for your service and welcome home. So, Frank, thank you for your service and welcome home.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.